So it's wonderful to have all of you here today, and let's hope in the next 1 hour we can really cover the long story of 20 years of Bajirao's time as a Peshwa. And Bharat has already said that this was supposed to be earlier on Sunday, 19th of April in Bombay at Khaki Labs, but since we are all locked down, this seemed to be the best way out, and we decided that we will come and speak to you online. So thanks for coming, and I'll start without spending too much time because we have a big topic to cover. So if you can see my first slide. Okay. I hope you all familiarized yourself with all how it works, the video of muting and so on. Now, today being the 300th anniversary, it should be commemorated because it was a time when a new era in Indian history started, and a new empire kind of took birth in the 18th century, or it was the rebirth of an empire which was existing in 17th century, which was partly rebirth in a very momentous day. That particular day and time, people did not know it, but as the days went by, this became more and more obvious that it was a era which is going to be the history of India. So I'll take you back to the 17th century when Chhatrapati Shivaji established the Maratha kingdom, and in the last decade of his life, as you can see in the slide over here, the kingdom had actually become an empire, because by that time he had extended it right up to the south, up to the banks of the river Kaveri, because he had gone down there to Tanjore, and he captured the important fort of Jinji, where later on his son Rajaram could withstand the Mughal siege for almost 7 to 8 years. In the next, from 1680, when Chhatrapati Shivaji died, till 1707, when Aurangzeb died, in the Deccan and in Maharashtra in particular, there was such a massive battle going on between the Mughals and the Marathas that by itself it's a story that deserves to be told. But today we are going to deal in the period after that, and we will start the story from the time Chhatrapati Shivaji's grandson Shahu, who was actually president in our camp for 18 years along with his brother, was released by the emperor's son. His purpose of releasing him was to create a divide in the Maratha polity, in that Tarabai, who was the wife of Rajaram, was holding fort, and he hoped that by releasing Shahu, a new contender for the throne of the Marathas would come in. And it happened that way, because when Shahu came in 1707 from Aurangzeb's camp, somewhere in Madhya Pradesh, he was released, in Doraha near Bhopal. And as he started coming towards Maratha, people started joining him, definitely with the true heir of the Maratha throne. The first few people who joined him this time, because he had no money, he had no army, he had no military skills, having stayed in the Mughal camp for 18 long years. The first people who joined him, Senapati Raji's father, Khandoba Chitnis, Parsoji Bhosle, who later on founded a small kingdom of himself, and Balaji Vishwanath. And these four people actually sustained the initial power of Shahu. Over the period that 1707 to 1730, if you look at that 6 years period, it's an extremely turbulent time. And during those years, so many difficulties were faced by Shahu, but these people actually sustained his rule during those 6 years. Until in 1713, Kanoji Angre, he was a very powerful admiral of the Maratha Navy, who was based in the Konkan, but he was with Tarabai, and he marched up the ghats and started marching towards Satara, pledging that I will remove Shahu and place Tarabai in his place. And not only that, the then Peshwa of the king, who was Bhairav Panta Pingle, when he went to oppose him, he was imprisoned and taken back as a prisoner to his fort in Kulaba. At that point in time, Shahu needed somebody who would stand forth and take forward his, we have to face this, because Kanpur had already reached at Lohagarh at that particular point. That is when, imprisoned by him, he was that time a Sena Karte, was promoted to be a Peshwa. He went forth with an army to face Kanoji. By a bit of persuasion, bit of military might, he finally came to an agreement with Kanoji, who already knew because both hailed from the Konkan. And they came to an agreement that Kanoji will accept Shahu as the sovereign. And whenever Kanoji is in need, because he had to in the Konkan, he had to in the city of Janjira, he had to face the English, he had to face the Portuguese. And whenever he needed any help, the Maratha power here, led by Shahu and the Peshwa, would help him in the Konkan. That is how the alliances started forming. Again, from 1713, when Balaji Vishwanath became the Peshwa and remained the Peshwa for the next 7 years, you find several problems, like even one of the rebels of. So, from all these vicissitudes, finally we reach the year 1718, and in 1718, a Mughal officer came to the Deccan. His name was Ali. He was at odds with the emperor. Farrukh was trying to remove him and his brother Abdullah Khan, who was the Wazir in Delhi. And Hussain Ali had helped the Marathas once with his artillery. So he sent a message to Shahu and to Balaji Vishwanath that, can you help me in this at this point? And it was decided that Balaji Vishwanath, along with Senapati Khanderao Dabade, and several other important members of the family at that time, including even the future heroes of the Maratha state, such as Ranoji Shinde and Mallara Holkar, then the grandfather of Nana Fadnis, all these people finally accompanied, and the young Bajirao at the age of 90, with a 30,000 strong army. You find them going with Hussain Ali to Delhi, and 12 years after the death of Aurangzeb, you find that the Marathas have succeeded in removing the Mughal emperor and putting somebody else in his place. And what did the Marathas get in exchange? Of course, literally they were well compensated, because every time they crossed the Narmada, per day on the march, they were awarded a certain amount of money. But more importantly, they were recognized as the two sovereigns of the Deccan. And the 6 subas of the Deccan, out of the 22 subas of the Mughal Empire, were given to them and recognized that that was the area from where they will collect the taxes, so they will get the Sarvishmukhi, and they would have their own Swarajya. Along with that, also Shahu's mother, Yesubai, who was almost for 30 years in the Mughal prison, was released, and she was brought back to Satara. And you can imagine the joy of her son when he saw his mother after so many years. In fact, last year we had a celebration of the 300th year of the return of Yesubai to Maharashtra. And this year, 1 year later, we find that Bajirao has become the Peshwa, and we are celebrating that. Because just a year after this event, Balaji Vishwanath, who was almost 60 years of age, died in April, 2nd of April, 1720. And by then, the future lieutenants of Bajirao and Bajirao himself were well versed in the skill of battle, because Bajirao fought his first battle when he was 11 years old, somewhere near Saswad, when some rebels were chasing him. And one of his early mentors at that time was none other than Pilaji Jadhavrao. Pilaji Jadhavrao probably can be counted as the mentors of Bajirao, and through the entire career of Bajirao, you find that Pilaji Jadhavrao remains with him. Around 1715, Ranojirao Scindia, who was at that time a foot soldier, had joined Balaji Vishwanath, and by sheer dint of his hard work and his loyalty, you find him getting promoted at every stage. Mallara Holkar also joined around that time. In fact, there's a very famous letter of Mallara Holkar written around 1723, where he seeks employment with the Peshwa, and he says that I will perform my duty, but I should also be treated properly, in his words. So these are the people who later on became the pillars of the Maratha state. And we now come to the day which we are celebrating, which is the 17th of April, 1720. So on the left you can see the dates which were given according to the various calendars there, and 17th of July, when he was awarded the post robes of the Peshwa and office. And this is the place, Masur, which is near Satara, just south of Satara, which you can see here. And that is the place where Bajirao was awarded the post of a Peshwa. And the date in the calendar was Chaitra Krishna Shashti, the Shaka year 1642, which actually this year fell on Monday. And today on Friday, by the international calendar, we are observing this date. It was not easy for Shahu to appoint a boy who was not yet 20 years old to be the Peshwa. And there was a lot of opposition because there were a lot of senior members in his cabinet. The Ashtamandal, which so-called, it's called, of 8 ministers who were there. And they definitely felt that he was too young and too immature to be appointed in such a way. But Chhatrapati Shahu was a conservative person, he was an emotional person, and who he felt that he owed Balaji Vishwanatha for his service. In fact, at one stage you find Shahu calling Balaji Vishwanath Atul Parakrami Sevak, or a servant of incomparable ability. So he told his ministers that he will appoint Bajirao for now on account of the service which his father had given to the state. And if it is found later on that he is of no use, we can rethink about it at a future point. So in the initial years, you find that Bajirao was on a kind of probation at the pleasure of the king. In fact, at one later point, you even find a letter written by Shahu to Bajirao that what are you doing? You're not coming in, you're not writing back to me, you're not coming and meeting me. Bajirao was somewhere in Malwa that time. If you continue behaving in this lazy way, I will remove you. And then you will complain that you have been removed from the post. So these kind of letters you find even in the early years of Bajirao. Now, today everybody knows Bajirao was a very important figure in Indian history, especially 18th century history. But at 1720, we stand at the midpoint of Bajirao's career. He was born in the year 1700 and he died at the age of 40, a few months before his 40th birthday in 1740. So at 1720, we are standing at the midpoint of his career. And just 20 years back in the year 1700, this, what you can see on the screen, is the first day cover which is issued by the Indian Post to honor his tricentenary. But this honor was given 5 years after the tricentenary started. Because in 1700, when the first request was made that such a postage stamp should be released, the postal department came back and asked, who is Bajirao? So, of course, we have come a long way since then. And the film, which came in 2015, made him famous, even if it was for the wrong reasons. And because we never saw the real Bajirao in that movie. Now the word Peshwa comes from a Persian word which means the foremost, because there's a word called Pesh Karna. So Pesh it has come from that. Peshwa is the foremost or the prime minister. In Marathi letters, it is always addressed as Pandit Pradhan. And the prefix before the Peshwa's name called Shrimanta, which was largely specific to the Peshwa and not used for the other Sardars. It was in 1818 when the last Peshwa was deposed that as a kind of a demotion, so to say, the English insisted that henceforth the Peshwa will not be called Shrimanta, but he will be called Maharaj. So Maharaj was considered a demotion from the title of Shrimanta later on. So I'm just saying how the fortunes of Bajirao have changed over the last 20 years. And today you need no introduction that who was Bajirao, that preliminaries can be dispensed with. So what happened when he first came? Many historians have made a lot of comments about his greatness. Like Yadunath Sarkar, who was a very famous historian in the first half of the 20th century, he said he's a heaven-born cavalry leader. In the early 19th century, Grand Duff, who wrote the history of the Marathas, he said Bajirao had the head to plan and the hand to execute. So these are the kind of remarks you have about his career. But he had his early problems. First thing was the elders in the court who opposed him. Then there was a big debate about where the Maratha Empire should expand. Should it go southwards and first release the south and then go north? So in the south, the king of Kolhapur that time, Sambhaji, was also there. And Shahu had kind of didn't want to interfere in that territory. Besides, some of his own ministers like Fateh Singh Bhosle, who was a kind of adopted son to Shahu, or the Pratinidhi, these would be, or Babuji Naik, who was another officer in the court. They were all given these mamlas or mamlats in the south that would go ahead and take over this area. Because this was a constitution of Maratha state when Balaji Vishwanath divided areas and told people that you can go and capture different parts of the country, and when you capture them, you can send a revenue back to the king, and part of it can be retained with yourself. In a way, they were kind of given a saranjam, and from that revenue they were supposed to maintain the armies which will sustain the state and which can be called on for duty whenever there's a requirement in case of war. So from that point of view, these different areas were kind of farmed out to different chiefs of the state. So one of the Bakhars gives a long speech which Bajirao gave in Shahu's court that time, emphasizing the importance of Delhi as the capital of the Mughal Empire. And he said, strike at the root, and the branches will follow by themselves. Listen but to my counsel, and I shall plant the Maratha banner on the walls of Attock. Saying this in 1723, when the Maratha kingdom consisted of 2.5 districts of Pune and Satara and a little more territory, was really a statement of somebody would say that this is being overreaching yourself. But this came true in the year 1758, not too long after. When he saw the enthusiasm and the spirit that of his Peshwa, it is said that Shahu heartily agreed with him and said, it is appropriate that you are Balaji Pant's son. With such men in my service, I can take the boundaries of my kingdom beyond the Himalayas. In those days, it was considered that beyond the Himalayas was a territory called the Kinnar Khand. So he said, Kinnar Khanda Made, you can take my territory. What is then difficult in this campaign? You go to Hindustan. The other chiefs will manage the Nizam and we can invade the Karnataka. So the first few years after he became the Peshwa, the first thing he did is he went to Malwa. Malwa was just north of Khandesh, north of Maharashtra, which is a large part of Madhya Pradesh today. There, one of the wazir at that time of the Mughal Empire was Nizam-ul-Mulk, and he always had the ambition that he wants to carve out his own empire in the south, free from Delhi. And he met the Nizam-ul-Mulk in 1721 because he had come down to fight with another adversary of his here, Alam Ali and Dilawar Khan. He defeated Dilawar Khan and then he went to fight Alam Ali. Then the Marathas were told to help Alam Ali. Of course, Marathas were always in a quandary which side to help because there are two Mughal chiefs fighting with each other. In 1722 or 23, again Bajirao met Nizam because they were campaigning in the same area. It's like two swords in the same scabbard. And they had to keep meeting each other. And they were sizing each other up. The Nizam-ul-Mulk, of course, much senior and one of the people who had never lost a battle, who was trained in the school of Aurangzeb, and he was going to remain with Bajirao as a foe in the foreseeable future. In 1724, finally, the Nizam got fed up of the situation in Delhi, and he decided, I will make my own empire in the south. In fact, at one place mentioned that Nizam was called the Deccani Bandar when he went to the court because he was a style of saluting in the court. So he came down to the south and he had asked the help of the Marathas. Marathas helped the Nizam because the Mubarak Khan, who was then the viceroy in the Deccan, was troubling them and not allowing them to collect the revenue. So they helped the Nizam, thinking that he'll be a better replacement to Mubarak Khan. And the Battle of Sakhar Kherda, which is somewhere in Marathwada region, was the battle in which the Nizam emerged triumphant. He awarded titles to the Marathas who helped him, like Bajirao was called Shahmat Panah, which is a kind of epitome of bravery and shelter of the poor, weak. And Pilaji Zadavara was with him, he was awarded a title. Sultanji Nimbarkar was with him, he was awarded another title. So Nizam thought that I have finally got the measure of the Marathas, and I will now use them to expand my own control over the territory. And known for his dissimulation among the enemy, he was a formidable enemy to have. Now, taking a long view of Bajirao's career, we realize that he could not have done this all on his own in the next 20 years. And the three most important people who come into his life at this stage were Mallarji Holkar, were Ranoji Rao Scindia, and Pilaji Zadavara. I've already spoken about these three earlier. In addition to this, there are several others who you can call as second-line leaders, like Baji Bhivrao Retrekar, Dawarji Sommoshi, who was a Sar Lashkar, Shankaraji Phadke, who was a Vasai later on, Ambaji Panta Purandare, Govind Hari Patwardhan, Vittal Shivdev Insulkar. So all these people also came along at that time, and they were the rising stars of the 1720s and 1730s. But last but not the least was his younger brother, Chimaji Appa. Indeed, it can be confidently stated that without a Chimaji at his back, there would be no Bajirao. Chimaji was a shield, and Chimaji had the persistence to persevere and win a battle, perhaps even more than what Bajirao had. So with these people, he went ahead and he could finally get what he did in the next few years. Now, after Sakhar Kherda, it was expected that the Nizam ul Mulk would kind of help the Marathas, would let them collect the revenues of the Deccan and so on. But the Nizam had his own ambitions. In 1725, they had a joint expedition to Chitradurga and Savanur, which did not see them looking at the same, I mean, eye to eye. And not only that, Sambhaji of Kolhapur was there, and from Shahu's side, the Pratinidhi and Bajirao were there. And Nizam was kind of relishing the idea that these two parties who are opposed to each other are helping him. So in 1726, Bajirao decided he's not going to go with the Nizam, he's going to go on his own. And he will not accept his cooperation. So he, on his own, went down all the way up to Srirangapatnam on his own campaign. And you find several letters by the Nizam written to Shahu saying that your Peshwa is not cooperating with me, why don't you tell him to cooperate with me? Finally, that never came to pass. And it was then that Nizam kind of drew a wedge between Kolhapur and Satara, who were rivals to start with. And he managed to get Sambhaji of Kolhapur to join his side. He promised Sambhaji that I will make you the single undisputed king of the Marathas and remove Shahu. So with that kind of allurements, he managed to win Sambhaji away. And Sambhaji openly joined the Nizam with his armies around 1727. Along with him, there were several other defectors from the Maratha side. Chimnaji Damodar Moghe was a Rajadnya of the Shahu who joined the Nizam, and he was promised that he would make the Peshwa of Kolhapur. The Pratinidhi was given a Jagir by the Nizam in the Marathwada region. He stayed neutral. Kanthaji Kadam Pandey from Khandesh, Pilaji Gaikwad from Gujarat, they did not take part in the battle which was coming up. And in the middle of June, you find that the Nizam ul Mulk, who had never lost a battle before that, started marching towards Pune and Satara to change the king. And the only opposition which he knew he had was Bajirao. So when Bajirao was in Srirangapatnam, you find Shahu writing to him that there is a consideration that is arisen here, and the Pradhan is ordered to return to the capital. So on 8th of March 1727, Bajirao left Srirangapatnam, and end of April he was in Satara. And by that time, the Nizam, with his heavy artillery and a large army, was already past the fort of Dharur in Marathwada and heading towards Pune. So that great invasion began in the middle of 1727, which finally led to the famous Battle of Palkhed. The Nizam began from passing via Bidar, Beed, past the fort of Dharur, and came in mid-1727 towards Pune, while the first requisite was to protect Shahu. So Chimaji Appa, who was younger, who was probably just 19 years of age that time, he took Shahu and took him to the safety of the fort of Purandar near Saswat, because that is one of the very strong forts which is not easy to capture. Then the different chiefs of the Marathas spread out. Like you find at Patas near Daund, Ranoji Shinde, he took charge of that place and he defended that place. Tukoji Pawar, who went to Nasik, he tried to defend that place. Bajirao himself took post at Saswat. Then Raghuji Bhosle and Fateh Singh Bhosle, they fought with Chandra Sen Zada, fighting from the Nizam side. The Nizam's armies attacked the Lowergarh fort, which was well defended. However, despite all these things, the city of Pune was not possible to defend because there is no wall. It's not a walled city, it's an open city. And that time it was just a large village actually. So really, it was not a very vital place at that point in time. But all these people were suffering from shortage of funds, shortage of food, and one of the people whose letters we have today is by Ranoji Rao Shinde, who wrote to Bajirao that those with saranjams of lakhs of rupees, saranjams is territory given to raise money to maintain troops, have not even kept 100 soldiers. And thinking of these, and he abused them, who perform incest with their mothers, have spoken half-truths and gathered only 150 men. He said, I have managed without funds to gather at least 150 men. But there is no food, I have no weapons. And we are still doing what we had agreed to. With those kind of meager soldiers, no weapons, no food, it was not possible to defend Patas, which was lost. And then Ranoji Rao went and joined Bajirao. And Holkar, Pilaji, Jadhav Rao, Davalji, Somvanshi were already with Bajirao at that point in time. Now, if you look at this map, you have to understand how exactly the whole thing kind of unfolded. Because as the Nizam started marching from Hyderabad towards the city of Pune, which you can see over here, and which you can see over here, you find that Bajirao, this violet color, goes from Saswad and heads up towards some villages on the way before he decides, I'm not going to defend Pune. I'm going to go more towards the Nizam's territory, which was even more important for the Nizam than a poor, miserable territory like Pune, which didn't really hold much of a wealth or anything of that sort. So he started going north as the Nizam came towards Pune. He crossed the Godavari at Pultamba and headed towards Aurangabad. Aurangabad was a totally walled city, not easy to break up. They had no artillery, it was totally cavalry force. And he went past Aurangabad and attacked Jalna, which was again in the Nizam's territory. He thoroughly looted the town, which is a way of kind of putting pressure on the enemy. From there he went to other places like Palaskhed, then he went right up to Washim in Vidarbha, and he went to Mangrul Pir. And from there, he made a feint towards Burhanpur. He pretended as if he's going to attack the Mughal city of Burhanpur, which is very close to the Nizam. So you find that Nizam sends a Sardar that to go and defend Burhanpur. But Bajirao never intended to attack that place in the first place. And from there, he goes along the Tapi. There's a place called Chopra here. He crosses the Tapi just a little bit of west of Chopra and goes towards the Narmada, where near Bharuch there was a pass to cross the river called the Baba Pyara Ford. He crosses that and he sits there for a week or so. Then from there again he comes down to a place called Songad in Surat. There he meets a Sardar of the Malwa region called Udaji Pawar, who joins him. In the meanwhile, the Nizam, thinking that Bajirao has gone to Gujarat, and that was somewhere in the last week of January, he comes back to Pune and he tells Sambhaji that you won the battle, I'm going to put you on the throne of the Marathas. He crowns him in Pune as the Maratha king, and it's customary that at the time of wedding, at the time of the marriage, you get coronation, you get married to. So there is a Sisodia princess of the state of Ramnagar somewhere in the Konkan area. So even Sambhaji was married at that time. And when all this was happening, Bajirao was sitting somewhere in Alirajpur, or Ali Mohan it's called, beyond the Narmada, and allowing his troops to take rest for 2 weeks. When he heard that the Nizam has kind of taken over Pune, Chimaji Appa wrote a letter to him that how badly the whole district has been ravaged by the Nizam's troops. He started from there, crossed these hills over here. This is called the Kasarbadi Ghat, and he came to a place called Betawad. This was around the last week of February when he came to Betawad. Now these are all old style dates, so you add 10 days to get the present international calendar. From when he came to Betawad, it appeared to the Nizam that he's approaching Aurangabad and he will soon attack his capital city of Aurangabad. So he decided that he will leave Pune and head towards Aurangabad to defend that city. So he was heading towards Aurangabad. Now he came further to some hills and he started sending messages to all his chiefs, Bajirao, that you come on my left, you come on my right, you come that side. He started positioning his troops preparatory to the Nizam crossing the Godavari. Now the Godavari, when he had to cross it, Nizam had to cross it in 3 stages. First, he sent his bazaar ahead of him, the first day. Second day, his infantry of the army crossed over. And the third day, his heavy artillery was to cross over. So the artillery of the Nizam was what the Marathas feared at that stage. And the Banjaras, who used to bring the food to the camp, when they came towards, there's a village called Palkhed over here. So when they came towards Palkhed, the Maratha armies came and chased them off. And soon you found that when the Nizam crossed over, before the artillery joined him, he was utterly surrounded on all sides by the chiefs of the Peshwa. Primarily the main 4 names again which are mentioned are Pilaji Zadarao, Ranoji Shinde, Holkar, Dawalji Somvanshi and Bajirao himself. That the entire camp was cut off from food, fodder and water. The Godavari was so close but he could not reach out to get any water. And without water the camp could not survive. Within 4 days, this most powerful of Mughal chiefs was suddenly brought to his knees, and you find that he had to sign a treaty. Before he was given water and food, Bajirao took hostages and then gave the water to the troops. According to the thing, he had to give the south of the 6 districts to the Deccan. He had to abandon the cause of Sambhaji. And in Cambridge History of India, it is mentioned that thus Bajirao unaided had brought to his knees the foremost soldier of his time, to the feat of arms of which any commander might well have been proud. And Montgomery, of course, was the person who described the battle and finally said that the Palkhed campaign of 1727 and 28, in which Bajirao outgeneraled Nizam-ul-Mulk, is a masterpiece in strategic mobility. So, and he's written about it in his book called Concise History of Warfare. When Nizam-ul-Mulk was defeated in Palkhed without a single drop of blood being shed, Bajirao's name reverberated throughout the country. But Bajirao was not the kind who would stop at that. And soon you find that he had already planned his next campaign towards the end of that year. 2 campaigns. So we come to the province of Malwa, which is just north of Maharashtra. What is the importance of Malwa? You'll find that if you look at the map of India, Malwa is the province which kind of connects the Hindustan, the northern part of the country, with the Deccan. Because the east of that there are huge forests, and to come via Bengal and Orissa was again a very difficult task. So Malwa was the region which was very crucial. All the invasions which ever came to the Deccan for the last 1,000 years always traversed through Malwa. And Malwa was not only that, it was also a very rich province. So it was important for Bajirao to capture Malwa. So he decided that he'll send his brother on his first expedition to Malwa. And you find Chimaji with Ranoji Shinde and with Mallara Holkar heading for Malwa in the end of the year 1728. Another thing was Savai Jai Singh of Jaipur. He was also interested in Malwa. And he thought that if the Marathas come to Malwa, I will take control of the Marathas and actually expand my kingdom right up to the Narmada. The 2 Mughal Subedars who were appointed there were Girdhar Bahadur and Daya Bahadur. Both were brothers. So these people had just chased off some attacks which came from Kantaji Kadam Pandey from Gujarat, and they were towards the western part of Malwa at a place called Amjera. Now Chimaji crossed the Tapi and the Narmada at a place called Nalchal. Here is a fort of Mandu over there. So normally Girdhar Bahadur expected that the Maratha troops will come to the west of Mandu and attack him at Amjera. So his army was facing this side. Instead of which Chimaji chose the path to go via Dhar. And when he came from this side, suddenly Girdhar Bahadur had to change the direction of the army and face the Marathas there. And there was a battle which went on, a fierce battle which went on for almost 3 years. Both Girdhar and Daya Bahadur participated, and from this side all the others participated. And both these chiefs, Daya Bahadur and Girdhar Bahadur, were killed in that battle. And the 2 Mughal Subedars being killed again. Practically after that he went to Ujjain. He placed that under siege. Again, it was a walled city. He could not really make much of a dent without the artillery. And Bajirao was keeping track of where Chimaji is going, and he used to keep writing to him what to do and what not to do. At Ujjain, he told him, don't waste time over there. Take whatever you can, collect whatever revenue you can, come back. And on the way back, there was another place which Chimaji went was in Gujarat. Because Gujarat was a bone of contention between the Senapati and the Peshwa. Both wanted Gujarat. And there was a change of hands between the 2 of them in the last few years. So he went and attacked Champaner in 1729 January and he way back, then to Deccan. When Chimaji was on the way back from Malwa, Bajirao was already on another campaign. So there's the Bundelkhand you find is in east of Malwa. And north of Bundelkhand, beyond the Yamuna and the Ganga, was the province of Allahabad. And Allahabad had a governor, Muhammad Khan Bangash. Bangash claimed some territories of Bundelkhand, and for about 5 or 6 years, there was a running battle going on between Muhammad Khan Bangash and Chhatrasal, who was the ruler of Bundelkhand. Chhatrasal was almost 75 to 80 years of age at that time. And at one point in time, Chhatrasal was defeated, and Bangash wrote a letter to the emperor in Delhi that give me permission to come to Delhi with my prisoners. But because Bangash was out of favor, that permission didn't come through. And though Chhatrasal remained a nominal prisoner, kind of Bangash also let down his guard. At that time, you find that Chhatrasal sent a letter to the Peshwa asking for his help. Of course, the Peshwa already decided I'm going to Bundelkhand. On the way, he got this letter, which was in a very poetically mentioned, which is referring to the Bhagavad Puran of the Gajendra Moksha story. जो गत ग्राह गजेंद्र की सो गत भई है आज बाजी जात बुंदेलन की बाजी राखो लाज. So he was saying, like the elephant who was caught by the crocodile, please relieve me from this and keep my respect and my reputation intact. So passing through a very unfrequented path you'll find here from Gadamangala near Jabalpur, which is a forested hilly region. Suddenly Bajirao lands up near Chhatarpur at a place called Dubela, where he had his capital, Chhatrasal, and he met Chhatrasal there. And from there he went and attacked Bangash, and Bangash was then sitting in the fort of Jaitpur, which is north of Chhatarpur. And there for 3 months, Bangash was placed in a siege by the Maratha army. The siege was so bad that all the food was exhausted. And there's a Persian text called the Siyar al-Mutakharin, which says that cows, horses, and asses came soon to be eaten. Things horrid became food, and a dead beast attracted 1,000 eyes. That's how hungry the people were. So in this era, when a bat as a food is creating a pandemic, you can imagine what might have been eaten at that time. Finally, Bangash surrendered. Bajirao asked him to disarm his entire army and let them go on the promise that they will never enter Bundelkhand again, a promise which Bangash maintained. Chhatrasal was very grateful, and he composed another couplet for Bajirao, saying, Jagat Dvay Upje Brahmana, Rugu au Bajirao, Undhai Rajputiya, Indhayo Turkao. The meaning is, Jagat Dvay Upje Brahmana, in the history of the world, 2 Brahmins were born, Bhrugu or Bajirao. Bhrugu is Parshuram, the incarnation of Vishnu. Undhai Rajputiya. In those days, it was considered that Kshatriyas in India were only the Rajputs, and Parshuram destroyed all the Rajputs. And the second was Bajirao, who destroyed the Turks. So this is one of the poems which was composed by Chhatrasal in appreciation of Bajirao's victory. Afterwards, there was a grand darbar held in Chhatrasal's court, where Bajirao did not sit, he kept standing. So Chhatrasal asked him, Bajirao, please sit down. So he said, you give me a place to sit and I will do so. So Chhatrasal said, you are like a son to me. Bajirao said, you have 2 legitimate sons, besides which you have 54 other sons. In this, if I get a place worth just 2 lakh rupees, because considering your entire estate, if I am compared with these 56 children, I will get 2 lakh rupees and my king will be angry that you went on the expedition, you brought nothing back with you. So I will sit if you give me a place that befits me, and I will sit on that. So the Raja then got up, Chhatrasal, and said, I have 2 sons, Hirdesai and Jagatraj, and you are my 3rd son. And I will make 3 parts of my kingdom and divide them as per seniority. Now, if one visits Chhatarpur, there's a place called Dubela, very near to it, which you must visit. It's got some beautiful palaces around the lake. The cenotaph of Chhatrasal is there, which was built by Bajirao himself later on. And Chhatrasal also made a present of his daughter by a Muslim courtesan called Mastani to Bajirao, and we have a picture of it which I will show you in a minute. She came and lived in Pune thereafter, where she occasionally danced on special occasions, and later is said to have married Bajirao. Oh, sorry, this is not the picture. I thought I had deleted this slide. So this rather Mona Lisa-esque picture is possibly Mastani, whose mother was a Muslim, and she followed that faith. She was already around 15 years of age when she came to Pune, and she was well versed in music, dance, also rode with Bajirao in many campaigns. It is not commonly known, however, that Mastani accompanied Bajirao on his later attack to Delhi. If the makers knew that, probably they would include the attack on Delhi also in that. And it is said that she was a Kanchani who rode stirrup to stirrup with Bajirao on a high horse. This picture which you see is supposedly that of Mastani. It is with the Fadnis family, and it is supposedly made by James Wales. From an earlier picture which Nana Fadnis had given me, you can see obviously it's a Muslim lady of some distinction, which was at that time. And at least 2 historians in the last 100 years have accepted that this picture is of Mastani and nobody else. Now, during the time that Mastani stayed in Pune, you find that except for the 100 rupees spent for her dance in the wedding of Nanasaheb Peshwa in 1730, not a single rupee of public money has been documented as having spent for her. All the expense probably were done by Bajirao himself. Her son, Shamsher Bahadur, who was also named by Bajirao as Krishna Rao, later on fought in many battles of the Marathas. As senior chief, his son Ali Bahadur became Nawab of Banda. And so this kind of history is there later on. Now, but victories over Malwa and Bundelkhand and Palkhed, naturally the Mughal court was thinking how to appease Bajirao, how to bring him in a manner that he will become a friend. And Savai Jai Singh took the lead in that, and he sent a wakil to Maharashtra and to the Nizam, asking to find out whether they can have a treaty with the Marathas, who is the person among the Marathas who is the most capable. So Deep Singh came here and first went to Satara, took a survey of what all is there, who all are there, and then he went to the Nizam. And then what conversation took place with the Nizam is reported by a wakil who was in the Nizam's court at that time. And we have that letter over here. And then, leaving all these things aside, the Nizam repeatedly began to ask, who did you find with the Satara Maharaj, who is eminent and capable of strategic planning and trusted by the Raja? Deep Singh replied, it was to find this that Maharaj Jai Singh Ji mainly sent me, that Bajirao Pandit Pradhan, who is renowned for his bravery in the land, but who is it that is capable of managing the affairs, known for diplomacy, respected and honored in the kingdom, and a mature administrator? Such a person I should identify. So I have fulfilled that task. Then the Nizam began to ask, so who did you identify in the Satara court as eminent, mature, efficient, and a confidant of the king? मग नवाब पुसो लागले की कोणास तुम्ही मातब्बर व पोखतकार व साहेब तरतूद व राजा मेहरबान गिरंदार कोणास ओळखले? So Deep Singh ji answers him in Marathi, जे सिवाय बाजीरावजी आणि कोणी सत्यवचनी अगर प्रामाणिक अगर पोखतकारी अगर चलन साहेब फौज दूसरा दिसत नाही. Which means then the Nawab began to ask, so who did you identify in the Satara court, the eminent, mature, efficient, and the confidant of the king? And he replied, Bajirao is the only one who can be described with us. There is none other who is honest and mature or capable of raising large armies or a short notice. In fact, this is corroborated by later British wakil who had come to Pune, who also says the same thing, that he could raise large armies in a very short time. From here, we come to a sad chapter of Maratha history, which is the battle between the Peshwa and the Senapati, who were rivals to take possession of Gujarat. Now, Bajirao had gone to Ahmedabad to meet with the governor, the Mughal governor there, whose name was Abhay Singh, who was from Jodhpur. And at that time, Trimbakrao Dabhade was just appointed as Senapati. Gujarat changed hands twice. First, in 1726, it was given to Chimaji Appa, then taken away from him when the Dabhades complained, 1729, given back to Trimbakrao Dabhade. And this kind of feud kept on festering inside. And Shahu was trying to keep a lid on it. Finally, the Nizam, who had just been defeated in Palkhet, decided to capitalize on this dissent in the Maratha court. And he reached out to Trimbakrao Dabhade that I will help you. And let's put the Peshwa out of his place. And he also called Muhammad Khan Bangash, who had just been defeated in Bundelkhand, to come down to the Narmada, and then they'll both join their forces and go with Dabhade to Gujarat, where Bajirao is sitting in Ahmedabad, and block his way back to Pune. So you find that after meeting Trimbakrao Dabhade at Chalisgaon, the Nizam proceeded to the Narmada, and Dabhade with a strong army of 40,000 people go towards Gujarat and starts moving up towards Baroda. When Bajirao saw this happening from Ahmedabad, he moved south and came to, if you can see this, he came to Baroda first. From Baroda he came to Bhilapur, and then he stopped there. The Senapati came north, crossed at the Baba Pyara ford and stood here. And Bajirao was telling him that we should not fight. We are both ministers of the same king. But none of these things were accepted. Along with Dabhade, there were many other Maratha chiefs who were in the army, like Chimnaji Damodar Moghe was there, Udaji Pawar, who had left Bajirao's side and gone on the other side, Kadam Pandey was there, Pilaji Gaikwad was there. So all these four chiefs were already with a large army of 40,000 men. For the first 2 days when the Senapati came to battle, Bajirao refused to join forces, join the war. And after that, when he thought on the 1st of April, 1730, that this was the right time to go about it, you find the army of 1731, 20 to 20,000 men, 25,000 men, Bajirao, almost half the army that Dabhade had. And Nizam al-Bangash, he put Holkar and Malwa to delay Bangash coming down to meet the Nizam. Chimaji Appa came down here. So all these things were happening, and on 1st of April, finally Bajirao decided the time is right. And at a place called Thuavi, which is just near Dabhol, he attacked Senapati's army. The Senapati fought very valiantly, with great valor. And it is said that Tir Chalur, the bota, the katara came off, the skin of his fingers came off from his firing the arrows one after the other, sitting on his elephant. And Bajirao sent a note that let's stop the fight, and if you fight in this manner against the enemies of the state, the king will be happy and he will reward you. And he told his men not to fire on the Senapati because the elephant was an easy target. Unfortunately, there was a defector from the Dabhadi side in the Bajirao's army, who was also a step uncle of Trimbak Rao, called Bhausing Toke, who told a gunner to fire at the Senapati, and the Senapati was killed. And after that, the whole battle turned Bajirao's way. All the Maratha chiefs who were with them were captured, but they were all released by him. And then he went his way back, avoiding the Nizam and Banga, should already come near Surat, and he made his way back to Satara. So here Shahu tried to bring them both to a kind of an agreement that we will kind of come to between the two of you, we will try to have a treaty. That did not really happen. But in an indirect way, because Bajirao had put down the dissent of the Senapati, after that, within the Maratha fort, he did not get any kind of opposition to his rule. The next phase which came was in 1733, when the Siddhi of Janjira had died, and the Konkan, which was the Siddhi's rule was actually Janjira, and that was where the next object of the Marathas was that to go to the Konkan. Now the story of the Siddhi is very funny in that there was a Swami in the Konkan called Brahmendra Swami. And the Siddhi got gifted to him by the which in Karnataka. And he asked Brahmendra Swami that, can you please bring an elephant for me, because Brahmendra Swami had a lot of contacts. So Brahmendra Swami said, okay, he was himself in Saugud. Well, coming, he brought the elephant along with him, till a point near the Fort Jaigarh, where the Swami was not with the group which was bringing the elephant for the Siddhi Saath, who was at Anjanvel that time. And some people of Kanoji Agre took the elephant and took it to Jaigarh. When Siddhi Saath came to know of this, he went to Chiprur, where the Brahmendra Swami had built a magnificent temple to Parshuram, which still exists actually today. And he went and completely started breaking down the temple. He started killing people, beating them up, looting the place, and so on, thinking that this has been done purposely by the Swami, and his elephant was sent away to the Kanoji Angre. So Brahmendra Swami had done no such thing. So he asked Angre to give the elephant back, took it himself to Anjanvel, and told the Siddhi that you have destroyed this temple, but now I kind of give you a curse that you will be utterly destroyed. This happened in 1726. At that time, the Marathas were busy with Palkhet and so many other things, so they could not really attend to this problem. Bajirao told the Swami that you please move from there to the Deccan. So near Satara, he was given a place at Dhawadshi, where he stayed for the remaining part of his life. In 1732, when the Siddhi of Janjira died, Bajirao went down to the Konkan. Pratinidhi also went down to the Konkan. Shahu was managing the affair from Satara. And between Bajirao and his men, they captured the entire land region which is opposite the fort of Janjira. Only Janjira was left, along with Anjanvel and Govalkot, two other forts with the Siddhi. Sripat Rao Pratinidhi at that time came to the Deccan and he captured the fort of Raigad, which was with the Mughals for almost 45 years. So we find that there are two kind of centers of power in the Konkan. One was Bajirao and the second was Pratinidhi, and both were not willing to cooperate with each other. So, and then suddenly the Siddhi went and approached the English, and you find the English Navy coming to help the Siddhi. So Bajirao in December 1733, he left that campaign midway and he came back to Pune. Another opportunity did not come because Sekhoji Angre died in August 1733, and without a proper navy to blockade the fort, it was not possible to kind of capture that fort there. So Bajirao, you find, comes back, and 2 years later, when Siddhi Saath ties up with Sambhaji Angre, surprisingly, who was a brother of Sekhoji, and he wanted to take over the fort of Kolaba. So he asks the Siddhi Saath to go and attack his brother Manaji at Kolaba. Siddhi comes north in North Konkan, and he starts attacking all the places around Manaji's territory near the fort of Kolaba and Alibar. And Chimaji Appa, waiting for this opportunity when the Siddhi will come on land for a land battle, descends into the Konkan in 1736, and in one battle finally gets Siddhi Saath killed. And that was how the power of the Siddhi was completely curtailed and remained the fort of Janjira, where Bajirao kept Siddhi in power, who was not going to trouble them in the years to come. So that's how the problem of Jajira itself was never captured. So that's what happened there in 1733. In 1734, a new front opened in the north. The Mughals decided that they must fight back the Maratha invasion and push them back south of the Narmada. The Mughal Wazir, who was Kamruddin Khan, Khan Dauran, the Samsamud-Dawla, and his brother Muzaffar Khan. There were three main leaders. And a 300-mile wide belt from Bundelkhand to Rajasthan was opened, which was coming down and trying to invade the Malwa region. At that time, you find Pilaji Gaikwad facing Kamruddin Khan in Bundelkhand, where Holkar and Ranoji Shinde were facing the Khan Dauran in the Rajasthan sector. And this battle went on for most of the year, until finally Khan Dauran was defeated at Jaipur, and Ranoji Shinde and Mallara Holkar took an amount of 22 lakhs as an indemnity from him, as a fine from him. And that is the time actually the Marathas first began getting involved in the disputes in Rajasthan, when the succession of Bundi was actually started. When the Marathas entered Rajasthan, Sawai Jai Singh had a review of the whole affair, and he decided that now I must try to obtain some cooperation with the Marathas. It's difficult to defeat them and push them back. So why not give him a territory of 40-50 lakhs in Malwa and co-opt him on the Mughal side and let him fight with everybody else on our behalf, let him protect us also. So he tried to convince Muhammad Shah, who was the emperor, that please let's get on to this kind of a arrangement. So he started working towards that. And in the midst of these discussions which Sawai Jai Singh was having, Radhabai, who was the mother of Baji Rao, decided to go on a pilgrimage to the north. And you can see from this map what an extensive area she traveled from Pune to Burhanpur, from there to Udaipur, from there to Jaipur. A lot of diplomatic discussions, back channel discussions took place at that time. And from Jaipur, she was escorted till the Yamuna to Mathura. And surprisingly at Mathura, Muhammad Khan Bangash, whom Baji Rao had defeated a few years back, came to receive Baji Rao's mother and said Baji Rao's mother is like my mother. And he further escorted her to Kashi, where she stayed for a few months. She built a lot of ghats and temples and so on over there. Went to Gaya. And then when she came back to Burhanpur, Baji Rao was ready to go north again. And it was decided that now Baji Rao will go to Udaipur and Jaipur and discuss with the Maharana and with Sawai Jai Singh how we should get the whatever demands he had with the Mughal emperor, how we should get them fulfilled. So the next year in 1736, we find Baji Rao going to Rajputana. So it is said that when he went to Udaipur first, Udaipur was the kingdom from which Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj claimed his ancestry. So when he went there, he was received by the Rana, the Maharana there. And though he had kept two seats next to each other, Baji Rao refused to sit on them. And he sat on a cushion at the foot of the Maharaja, saying, you are in place of my sovereign Shahu, and therefore I cannot sit at the same level with you. You have got 16 Umrao under you, that's what he says. So you cannot be this thing. At the same time, he did not hesitate to claim a tribute, and about 1.5 lakh rupees were taken as a chaut or as a tribute from the Rana of Udaipur. And also a district called Banhada or Banera was given to the Peshwa. So this is what happened in Udaipur. From there he went to Jaipur. Kashibai was with him. He went and visited the temple of Nathdwara also that time. Went to Jaipur. Because Udaipur had been given a higher status, the king of Jaipur also thought he will be given the same status, but Baji Rao refused that. He said that I gave this respect to Udaipur because he was equal to the Raja of Satara, and he never accepted the Mughal as a master. While the king of Jaipur was always a servant of the Yavana, and therefore I cannot give him the same respect, so I will sit next to you on two cushions of equal stature. I will be to your right and you will be to my left. These things have come to us from various Rajput documents at that time called Veer Vinod and Vansh Bhaskar and so on. And also there are some other papers in Rajasthan which give us this thing. So these meetings between Sawai Jai Singh and Baji Rao went on for almost 3 months at Jaipur. And the demands which Baji Rao made was that I want a Subedari of Malwa. A Mughal prince should be the nominal governor of Deccan and 50 lakhs of Jagir should be given to the Peshwa. The kingdom of Tanjavur and the fort of Shivneri should be given to Chhatrapati Shahu. Then forts like Mandwa, Mandu, Dhar, Raisen should be given to for the Peshwa's family. The entire region south of Chambal should be given to the Peshwa. The Hindu place of pilgrimage, Prayag, Kashi, Gaya, Mathura should be given to the Peshwa. Of course, these things were not easily acceptable to the Mughals. And you find a letter from Ranoji Rao Sindhe at that time written to the Mughal, to the Maratha Vakil at Delhi, saying to Khan Dauran that tell the Nawab that we are actually helping him. Our God has given us enough, but we get worried when a peace is signed and a treaty is signed. When there is no treaty, we are happier. In a sense, threatening them that if you don't sign a treaty, we are preparing for an attack to Delhi. Shinde and Holkar in 1736 for the first time stayed in Malwa region with their armies in the monsoons. Well, Bajirao came back to Pune, expecting that the Farman for the ceding, for the cession of Malwa will be reaching him shortly. It did not. So he realized that diplomacy is not going to help. And now we reach the point, I would call it the high noon of Bajirao's career, when he made an attack on the imperial city of Delhi. So what did he do actually? He was saying that I will go to Delhi to show the Mughal emperor that if you don't accept my demands, the Marathas can actually reach you. So leaving Pune on the 12th of November 1736, he started moving north, passed through Baranpur in December. He took the tribute from Bhopal, crossed the river Betwa, and then he finally reached the near place called Ater, which is south of the Chambal. And there the king of Ater thought that Sadat Khan, who was the Nawab Awadh, is protecting me, so I need not pay anything to Bajirao. But Bajirao attacked Ater and extracted a heavy indemnity from him, and before Sadat Khan could come to his help. And then he sent Holkar across the Yamuna, the Dwab, to loot all those places there, like the Etawa over here, and all these places right up to the opposite bank of Agra were all looted by Holkar. When Holkar came there, Sadat Khan came there with his large army to stop him from doing any more activities there. And you find Holkar thinking that it's only a small army of Sadat Khan. He finds Holkar is chasing that army. When he suddenly came across the big army of Sadat Khan, he had to turn around and run back because he could not have faced that army. And during that time, about 1,500 Marathas were killed, and Holkar had to come back across the Yamuna to Gwalior, where Bajirao was based. Now, Sadat Khan at this point felt that he had made a big victory over Bajirao. And he wrote to the emperor that he has achieved a great victory. So Bajirao has written a letter to Chimaji at that time where he describes all these things. After Holkar came back, he said, staying at the confluence of the river Gambhir and Yamuna, that is somewhere here, at this point, which has got too many ravines. But Khan Dauran and Muhammad Khan Bangash were coming to Agra because they were also coming from Delhi to face Bajirao with two big armies. Khan Dauran had one army, Wazir had another army, Sadat Khan third army from Awadh, all converging on that area. It would be difficult to deal with. So Sadat Khan has also written to the emperor and Khan Dauran, Kamaruddin Khan, that the Maratha army came across Yamuna and I sank them. I killed 2,000, drowned 2,000 in the river. Mallarji Holkar, Vithoji Bule were killed. Bajirao raided us. This is what happened to him. There is no strength left in his army, in Bajirao's army. Actually, Mallara was not killed. I will cross the Yamuna and push the Marathas south of the Chambal. He wrote many things. This is Bajirao speaking. That were mere gossip. He received the emperor's approbation and rewards in the form of robes, a pearl necklace, an elephant, and a turban. His Vakil was also awarded the turban. Sadat Khan had made his position very strong with the emperor. So he wrote contemptuously to all his amirs. In conclusion, Bajirao says that the message he's got to the emperor is, my army has no strength left. It is lifeless. It has been sunk and demolished. So, Bajirao writes, the Mughal way of doing business. They do little but boast a lot. What the emperor thought was true has to be proven false. There are two thoughts towards achieving this. One, sink Sadat Khan. Or the second, go to Delhi and burn its suburbs. Then the falsehood will be exposed. When I found Sadat Khan would not leave Agra, because Agra fort was very strongly fortified, I decided to go to Delhi, burn the city's suburbs and show the emperor that the Marathas are still there. The question really was that with three Mughal armies totaling 100,000 people to the south of Delhi, how does one go past them and reach the capital? So that was a real challenge. And we'll see how Bajirao faced it. In his own words, this became the high point of his career in March 1737, when he finally began. Delhi was an imperial city which had never faced an invasion since 1556, when Akbar actually came down and defeated the Afghans at Panipat. So, 180 years of peace, very, very prosperous city, tremendous wealth, one of the richest cities in the world. So, on 17th of March, Bajirao Sahib marched, leaving the Padshah's road, covering long distances before every halt, through the country of Daman Singh Chudaman Jat. So, this was towards the hilly side of the called Mewat. It passed through the hills, skirting the hills. Khan Daran and Bangash went to Agra. They met Sadat Khan on 23rd of March 1737. Dhondo Pant was a wakil of Bajirao with Khan Daran. Sadat Khan asked Khan Daran, I have broken Bajirao's army. The camp attendants also have run away. The Khasa also has crossed the Chambal and went away. And Bajirao has run away beyond the Chambal. You are still this wakil? You have still kept his wakil? For what purpose? Send him away. Therefore, Bajirao says Dhondo Pant was given leave to depart. Khan Daran did not have listened to Sadat Khan. However, he sent him away as he did not suspect what he was told was wrong. Dhondo Pant came back to me. Kamruddin Khan and Azimullah Khan came towards Agra. I did not confront them, leaving them 7 kos to my right. 7 kos is 14 miles. I passed them and riding 20 kos a day, which is 40 miles a day, in just 2 stages. On the 29th of March, keeping Barapula and Kalika temple to my right. Now we talk of Delhi. Kalika temple is in Delhi. And Barapula also is in Delhi. I stayed in Kushbandi near the city of Delhi. Now Kushbandi is not easily identifiable, but I feel that it is a place called Kushak Mahal, which is a hunting lodge of Firoz Shah Tughlaq, which is within the premises of Teen Murti, where we have got the Nehru Memorial Library. And while Bajirao reached there, the Mughals generals in Mathura were still feasting, and then that is when they heard that Bajirao has reached the city. So immediately they left Mathura and started moving towards Delhi. And Bajirao says, after reaching Delhi, it's a defenseless city, maybe 5,000 or 6,000 troops are remaining in the city. I contemplated burning the suburbs of the city. Now here you find a difference between a conqueror and a statesman. However, in that, Delhi is a great city. He calls it a Mahasthal. And there was no use ruining the Badshah. Secondly, the Badshah in his mind wished to have a treaty with me. However, the Mughals do not let him do so because there is a camp in his darbar which is not allowing him to have a treaty. And inside the cord of diplomacy and politics. For these reasons, I cancelled the idea of burning the city and sent letters to the Padshah and Raja Bakhtmal, 2 elephants and horses and camels had come from the city, which I appropriated. The people from the cantonment had come for the yatra at the Bhavani temple. I roughed up some of them. So the news went back to the Badshah that Bajirao and the Marathas are in Delhi, which nobody believed. When there are 100,000 soldiers, armies, stronghold sitting south of Delhi, how can Bajirao reach there? So finally they sent a spy disguised as a beggar. And I didn't get this beggar back, and what he brought with him as a large handful of grain, mostly it was dry, unground gram, chana, a few scraps of raw bread, devoid of salt, and some pods of red, the staple diet of a Maratha trooper. And when they saw this diet, which was being brought by this beggar, they knew that the Marathas were there. So obviously there were 7,000 people. And all these Maratha chiefs, Mallarji Holkar, Ranojirao Shinde, Tukaji Pawar, Jivaji, and Yashwantrao Pawar, Manaji Paibude, Govind Hari, they were all with Bajirao at that time. And they all, Satyaji Jadavra went forward, drew them back, they attacked them. Many of those chiefs were killed, 400 people were wounded. And they were all, just then Bajirao heard that Kamruddin Khan was approaching Delhi. A small skirmish with troops of Kamruddin Khan before he moved on to Kotputli in Rajasthan by Rewari. So that was his purpose of showing that I can reach Delhi. Muhammad Shah did not give up. He called the Nizam from the south. The Nizam was called to Delhi and he was, with drums beating, he was taken to the Badshah's palace, which was not allowed. It was an honor only for the Badshah. You could not play music near the fort. And he was appointed the Wazir. He was given the title as Asaf Jah and so on, and said, you must go down to the Deccan and defeat Bajirao. So when the Nizam with a huge army of 75,000 men started coming down to the Deccan, Bajirao started moving up from Pune with another army, and he told Chimaji Appa, who had actually he was already in a campaign in the Konkan versus the Portuguese. So he drew him out from that campaign and told him, "You come and stand in the Tapi and stop Nizam's son Nasir Jung from coming north with the army, because I don't want to be caught between the Nizam from the north and Nasir Jung from the south." So Chimaji stood at the Tapi to stop Nasir Jung from progressing to help his father. And Bajirao marched towards Bhopal. When the Nizam reached near Bhopal, suddenly he felt that he's not, though he had a strong army, he had an artillery. He suddenly went inside went inside the fort of Bhopal. This time it took the big lake in Bhopal, which is the back of the fort. So he thought that he was going to be short of water. So he went inside the fort of Bhopal, and he found Bajirao saying that, "I thought the Nizam was very man, but he intelligence, and he has made a mistake going inside the fort." And sure enough, the Marathas surrounded them, all the food was again cut off, and for time their food got over. And they started eating the gun bullocks, which the Rajputs were with them, like the kings of Kota and Datia and Orcha were also with the Mughal army. They would not eat because they were vegetarians. And soon they had to start appealing that let's negotiate about this. So Bajirao says the Nawab is great, the Nizam, but he should have come to an agreement and contract. Or he should have come out and fought for his trouble. He acted in a what honor is left in this for the Nawab now? So be it. I have now stopped all passage of food and fodder. The Nawab, who would not utter the words of the negotiations began. The Nawab, who would not utter these words, spread consent, had to sign Malwa to us, and also had to utter these words. What had never been achieved before has been achieved. It is difficult to get the Malwa actually gave it to Bajirao. Our mind was left feeling. Bajirao said this is the ultimate apocalypse for Nizam. But what we do, seeing the calamity he faced, he had to give it but Bhopal. But Bajirao did not let the Rajas of Kota and Datia and Orcha free. So after he had humbled the Nizam at Bhopal, and from there Nizam went back to Delhi, Bajirao made a separate excursion to Kota, where the Maharaja Kota was punished and was penalized for the help given to the Nizam. And then he came back to Deccan. So this is what happened in 1738, and this was the last major battle actually that Bajirao himself can be said to have fought. Because in 1737 and again in 1739, the Portuguese, who had become very unpopular because of their proselytization in the Konkan area, a long-pending campaign was going on. And in 1737, Chimaji had captured the island of Sashti, which extends from Bandra all the way up to the river Ulla, and the same island already in the Maratha 1737, which was one of the strongest forts over there. And in 1739, you find that Chimaji Appa leads a huge army, and in that he has all his chiefs coming there. There was Ranoji Sindhya, there was Mallara Holkar, there was Pilaji Zazara, there was Baji Bhivrao. Baji Bhivrao, in fact, was killed at the Battle of Tarapur. Tukojirao Pawar, they were all present in the final battle at Vasai. The feeling that Chimaji had was so intense at that time that he said, if you don't take the fort, and if I die, stuff my body in a cannon and fire it inside the fort. That was the kind of spirit they had to take that fort. It is said that the entire Sashti and cost Maratha lives. And finally, on the 4th of May 1739, 4 mines were set off under the walls of Vasai, and there were big breaches made, and the Portuguese surrendered. And in his generosity, Chimaji allowed them 7 days to march out of the fort with all their women folk, children, and their band playing music to their ships by which they went to Goa. So that was a generosity to a defeated foe, in spite of having such a large number of casualties in that battle. At that time, Bajirao was at Burhanpur. Shahu had a feeling that the Mughal throne was under threat, and because Nadir Shah had come to Delhi. And the Marathas must go and help the Mughal emperor at that point in time. Now, when Nadir Shah came to Delhi, he was in Delhi from 11th of March to 4th of May after defeating the Mughals at Karnal. And that was a time when the final stage of the Vasai battle was going on. And finally, when Bajirao came to Burhanpur, he kept urging Chimaji that please send your army to me, I have to go there. And it was thought that if Bajirao comes to the north, then if Muhammad Shah has been deposed or imprisoned or killed by Nadir Shah, they will put in place of Muhammad Shah, the Maharana of Udaipur, with the help of Bajirao's arms on the throne of Delhi. But eventually on the 4th of May 1739, Vasai surrendered, and 5th of May 1739, Nadir Shah returned to his country with a huge loot and a massacre. It's a similar situation arose 20 years later when Abdali attacked India. And Maratha army that time was able to go north and face him, which was not possible now because the Vasai campaign took place here. A similar situation happened at the time of Panipat 20 years later. The year 1740 saw Bajirao's last battle against Nasir Jang on the Godavari or around Aurangabad, and he got 2 districts in Narmada which he went to take possession of, where he had a fever, and that is where he finally died in April 1728. Now this is a very interesting map which shows the latitudes in which Bajirao travelled in the 20 years that he was the Peshwa, and you find that he travelled from India starts from 8 degrees north to 28 degrees north latitude to 36 degrees north. The Bajirao travelled from 13 to 28 degrees latitude. You can see these ups and downs, the latitudes and the years on the x-axis in which Bajirao travelled. And from Gujarat right up to say Chhattisgarh was again 1,000 kilometers, and the length north to south about 2,500 kilometers. That is the range in which he operated, and all on horseback. And they traveled 60 to 80 kilometers a day if required, sometimes even more. They traveled light, they carried an extra horse between 2 riders. They used a long spear, the sword, the shield, bows, arrows, and rarely muskets to fight their enemies. The English Wakil who had come to India and Pune in 1739, he writes that there is a foundry where mortars were being poured in Pune. And we still have a suburb here called Topkhana to this day. Yes, the cannons were not technically as good as they should have been. Sometimes they burst while firing. They were heavy, they needed several bullocks to pull them and so on. But by the end of the century, you find the army of Maharji Shinde had evolved to such an extent that the Maratha cannon was better. Yes, it was better than the East India Company's cannons. And some of the captured cannons from Maharji Shinde's army were sent to the Woolwich arsenal near London to study how they have been constructed. But the beginnings were made in Bajirao's time in Pune, when the cannons were being poured. Second point of Bajirao's career was he was weak at sea. After Stekhoji died in 1733, he did not get the cooperation of the Navy, the Angre Navy. And in 1739, when Vasai came into their possession, the English at Bombay, in one of the minutes of their meeting, they have discussed that now that Bajirao and Chima have got possession of Vasai, these 2 brothers will be so powerful because they got very big resources that they will be a much bigger threat to us than even the Angres are. And they have already begun their shipbuilding activity in the island of Arnala, which is just north of Vasai. So, unfortunately, within 18 months of the capture of Vasai, you find both Bajirao as well as Chimaji Appa were dead. And this could not be pursued any further. But that was the aim which you can see from there. Now, another thing that Bajirao faced was his debts. He had huge debts. And in the letters to Brahmendra Swami, he was his kind of spiritual preceptor in the Deccan. The debts have drowned me. It was better to lose my life instead. Die by poison or sit by the Swami's feet. Just this much is left to do. Another letter, he said, debts do not get over. What use is life? Is it to live now? I will sacrifice my life. Then he says, you have become a saint and you have made us a householder. In the bargain, I have landed with a debt of 20 lakh rupees. 20 lakh rupees in those days. Now, every day I get up and fall in the feet of the debtors. Falling into the feet of the Siledars, soldiers, I split my forehead. I have drowned in hell with debts and debtors. If you liberate me from debt this year, I will give my life to God. Then he says that today Dabades and Gaikwads and Pandes have treasures of crores of rupees. My serving my master loyally and sitting at your feet has made it difficult to even satisfy my own needs. So behind all this raising of armies and conquests, this was the internal story of his finances. And when Bajirao died, he died in debt. And finally, the debt was paid by his son, Nanasaheb, in the years to come. This slide gives you an idea of what was the growth of the Maratha Empire from the small 2.5 districts that he had in 1720 to this huge empire which was at the time of his death. And that's why we say that it was Bajirao who kind of created an empire from a kingdom. The historian Jagannath Sarkar has this to say, the place of Bajirao in India's history comes home to us with unmistakable force and vividness when we compare the political situation of the country in 1740 with that in 1720. These 20 years of his active career witnessed a complete revolution in the character of the Maratha national state and the entire redistribution of political power throughout India. No historian can deny the fact that both these changes were the work, conscious or unconscious, of Bajirao. So you can see why we say that this 20 years time was actually the era of Bajirao. And that era finally ended with his death, which was in Raver Khedi on the bank of the Narmada, which is a samadhi today by the bank of the Narmada. And that is where he died after a very short poem. Now, in this, I will just quote a poem which kind of tells you what Bajirao looked like when Chitari, an artist, had come down from the Badshah to tell him that please describe to me what Bajirao is. Which originates in Marathi. It may not be an original contemporary document, it would help us to give an image of Bajirao. He says, atop a horse with one foot in the stirrup and the second across, he's putting his foot across the horse. The horse trots along. The reins thrown over the neck. He's not holding the rein of the horse, it's over his neck. A spear on his shoulder. A smile beautifies a face of indescribable luster. A zari turban on his head, a befitting robe on the body, the garment round the waist tied in Brahminical style. He rubs the ear of corn, which he takes from the fields from which he is going, with his hands, and throws the grain in his mouth. And the red chilies he carries, he chews now and then. So when this description was taken to the emperor, it seems that he has said, "Ye to shaitan hai." For him, it was true. It was really a shaitan. So I'll end my talk here today, and if there are any questions, I'll be glad to ask. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. So lots of questions. I don't think we'll be able to take all of them, but one of the recurrent questions 2-3 people have asked, some of them wrote it privately, is about the debts that the Peshwas, for every war, many of them, they ended up paying more for the war than actually what they collected. So can you just explain why was this the condition?
It is not that they collected less, they collected more. But along the way, from where they were collected to the point where they were supposed to reach, which is either at Satara or Pune, the two central authorities, there were a lot of leakages on the way. And sometimes those leakages were because people were kind of not giving the correct accounts, or sometimes they were because there were really very great expenses in the north, because of which this money could not come down here. You find in Nanasaheb Peshwa's time, he writes a famous letter that there is a Suvarna Nadi from the north and there is a Suvarna Nadi from the south. But unfortunately, before the Suvarna Nadi reaches Pune, the waters of this river of gold is somehow they're evaporating on the way. So the central part, which was finally in the buck stops here, the saranjams given to the various sardars were meant to raise the armies and they were supposed to join the central part. But what if they don't do that? What if they don't perform their duties? Then the final onus of raising an army and going to war, it ended with the Peshwa because the king held him accountable. And the Peshwa could not completely control what was happening and the funds which were coming back here. So on his own account, he had to raise loans wherever he falls short. The enemies did not wait to see whether the finances of the Marathas are adequate to face the war or not. When the time comes, he had to raise the money. So the revenues were there, but they all did not come to fight a war when it was required.
Okay. There is a question from Anirudh where he asks, how true is Savarkar's claim that Bajirao sought to establish a Hindu Pada Padashahi? Did religion play a major role in these conquests, or was it only territorial ambitions?
Actually, during the 18th century, you find that there were a lot of demands made that the Hindu places of pilgrimage should be handed over by the Mughals. And eventually they were not. Even in Goa, when with the Portuguese and the Marathas had a treaty, the first draft of the treaty you sent to the Portuguese said that you will stop conversions, you will not demolish temples and so on. But when the Portuguese did not accept that, that clause was dropped by the Marathas. So as you go ahead into the 18th century, 17th century, the battle was more about a religious oppression which was being resisted. And the feelings that this religious oppression must be kind of resisted was much stronger than the 18th century, when the religious oppression was not an issue, at least in the territories which were already controlled by the Marathas. So that feeling, as you go further into Maratha history, you find it kind of coming down. And the expansion of empire becoming the greater purpose. So in that respect, I would say Marathas were the last indigenous empire of India, and probably the first indigenous empire after 700 years, which was from the people here, which spread out in all India, in all regions of the country, unlike Vijayanagar, which remained south of the Tungabhadra. So in that respect, you have to see the importance. Had we not had this period of the Marathas, 150 years being in charge of such a huge territory, what would you have had? You would have had a series of people coming and ruling over us. Of course, they eventually got kind of merged into the Indian consciousness over 200, 300 years at this period. So that is the kind of picture which you find when you assess the Maratha rule. But I haven't read this book of Savarkar which he mentions, so I've heard of it.
One more question is about sources. When you're researching on your stuff, whatever you write, Grand Duff and Bakar, there are a few questions on that. How much should we take things with a pinch of salt when these things are there, and how to get what is correct and what is
See, it was Itihasacharya Rajwade who said that one letter is enough to trash all the Bakars that have ever been written. But when you don't get an original letter describing, like you have a letter from Bajirao, 5-page letter describing his campaign in Delhi. So you rely on that. But if this letter is not there, like we have lost most of the letters of the Maratha period, if that letter is not there, then you rely on Bakars, which are subjective, personalized accounts of what happened at that particular time. So, and Grand Duff, there are two opinions about Grand Duff, because he had a lot of Maratha documents because he was in Satara, which he referred, which are no longer available for study today. But many of the things he has mentioned have been debunked by future historians. So you have to weigh each piece of evidence that comes to you. And when you don't have original letters, you have to use Bakars. And when you find some parts of Grand Duff are substantiated by these two things, you can use his quotes. That's what I found.
There are a few which are there on spy networks. Everybody knows Shivaji's, spy network, legendary stories and like that. How strong was the spy network in the Peshwa era, especially Bajirao and generally in Peshwa?
There was no one hero like Bahirji Naik in Shivaji's time, but there were all the wakils in all the courts which were sitting there, and they had people, informers, who used to write letters to them to what is happening. Today Nizam has come 2 stages beyond Dharur. So these are informers who are sending letters to them. Or somebody sitting in the Nizam's Darbar and reporting a conversation which took place there. So it was not in the spy in the kind of cloak and dagger kind of thing, and people went in disguise and found out these things. Because the nature of governance and the nature in which mobilizing armies took place at that time, much larger scale, 40, 50, 70, 80,000 people can't get together without things getting out of, the news getting out of what is happening. So the nature of spying or espionage was different. That's the change which took place in the 17th and the 18th century. That's what I feel.
Okay. There's a question: why was so much focus on Malwa? Didn't they look at Bengal and Orissa at that?
Bengal and Orissa came in the post-Bajirao period. In the next book, we'll be dealing with that. So the expansion took place organically over a period of time. Malwa, I already said why it is important.
I think so. You had touched on the relation between Chhatrapati and Peshwas, but is there any change, ups and downs in later course of time?
The Chhatrapati's rule actually changed from the time of Shivaji Maharaj to the time of Shahu, in the sense that Shivaji's Maharaj's authority was centralized. The army was paid from a central treasury. It was not, no watans were given or saranjams were given to people that you farm the revenue from this piece of land and keep your own army, and then when we call you, you come there. The army was centrally paid, at least to about 80% of the extent. So in a way, they were all centralized. Now this original structure of the Maratha Empire was kind of destroyed in the period when the 27-year-old war with Aurangzeb took place. And when Shahu came, not having military or training to fight a war, he became more and more dependent on his various chiefs. for whatever he had to get. So Surendranath Sen in his book Military System of Empire, the Marathas says, well, Shivaji was the owner, Shahu was a pensioner who was dependent on his chief sending him the money. That was the basic change that took place between the role of the king. But Shahu, without an army, had such a moral authority on the entire Maratha mandal, you can say, that it was his word which did make a difference. And till he died, his word carried weight.
A lot is talked about. Many people refer to Bajirao as the Dusra Shivaji, right? Some of them, right? Now, how would you compare the strategic mobility? I'm purely looking at it from the point of view of
the comparisons are very onerous, first thing. Secondly, times were different. In the time of the 17th century, the kind of battle which we had to fight, I was in the Navy, and typically you have two kind of scenarios. One is with the Navy with an aircraft carriers, and one which is a Navy which got predominantly submarines. So the aircraft carriers is a Navy which occupies the sea, okay? And the submarine Navy is the weaker Navy which is denying the Navy to the enemy, but it cannot have the strength to occupy. So in the 17th century, forts were very important because it was difficult to hold the plains from an invading army. In the 18th century, the Marathas were strong enough to come and live in the plains. So you find Shahu staying in Satara, the Peshwa staying in Pune, and all the chiefs living in different plain plateaus where people can invade them if it comes to that. So the kind of terrain, the kind of situation was different. So it cannot be strictly compared. But I would hate to compare these two. Though the genius of Chhatrapati Shivaji, as I always say, was never repeated in the annals of Maratha history. And he was not just a warrior, he was also a king. So that's the fundamental difference between these
two. There are a lot of questions regarding the Samadhi of Bajirao Peshwa and the fact that some people say it is going to go under the dam waters, the tailrace waters of the Narmada. So a lot of people are asking questions.
Actually, I last went there about 10 years back, and it has been restored to a large extent now, and they've made a wall which kind of will prevent the water to come in. But when the dam at Mandaleshwar eventually is completed, it is said that there might be a foot of water in the Samadhi. I don't know what is the current situation there. We have not gone there for about 10, 11 years. But it is impossible to raise the Samadhi higher than what it is. So either they have to make a wall to prevent it, or to accept that the dam waters will not go beyond a limit, which in today's age is a very difficult proposition. So we just have to wait and watch, increase awareness about heritage structures, which I think is the key to all this.
One question was with reference to the fact that he was a Brahmin. His father was an administrator, but from the change from being a Brahmin to doing a duty of a Kshatriya, how did this transition happen?
Yeah, actually, if you look at in Chhatrapati Shivaji's time, the armies were led by his Peshwa, Moropanta Pingale, who was also a Brahmin. So it is not that, the roles of people started changing when the army started forming and started kind of going. Even Balaji Vishwa, 15 days before he died, he was fighting a battle near Kolhapur. So he did lead armies. When the army was going to Delhi, he was not a warrior in the sense that Bajirao was. But the roles could not be mutually exclusive, that I will only do administration. So there were a few people who would only do that. But in the case of a Peshwa, a Peshwa was modeled after the Dalwai of Mysore. It's a stage which is probably intermediate between the Senapati and the Prime Minister. Or he's doing both the roles. So that is what the Maratha Peshwa was modeled on, the Dalwai of the Mysore Maharaja.
Great. I think so. We have asked a lot of questions. One last question from my side.
Okay.
The relationship between Peshwa Bajirao and Chimaji Appa, does it look like Chimaji Appa was more the person who consolidated and Bajirao the guy who went out and got new territories? Or
it's difficult to generalize because if you see Chimaji's three main battles, whether it's Vasai, whether it is Malwa, or it's against the Siddhi, when he went to battle, the enemy was killed. Siddhi Sahib was killed. Giridhar Bahadur was killed. Those are frontal battles which we took part in. And Malwa was captured because of that battle. The Konkan was, Habshan was released from the Siddhiya because of him. The Portuguese territory in the Konkan was released because of him, because of Chimaji Appa. On the other hand, you find Bajirav's battle, whether it's the Palkhe, whether it's the Bhopal. For the battle of versus the Senapati, they were mostly bloodless fights. He would cut off the supplies of the enemy, bring him to his knees, and make him surrender. It was not that those kind of frontal battles that he fought. That's the basic difference.
And of all the battles of Bajirao, which do you think is the best battle in terms of strategy?
By consensus, the Palkhe is the one which is considered the most important battle of Bajirao. So I suppose because that is where he made his mark, and that is where he really had to use his skill against a very powerful adversary at that time who had never been defeated before, and where half the Maratha chiefs were on the opposite side. So that was the time I think he really showed his skill. I would say Palkhe would be number one.
Lovely. And can you just tell me which is your next book coming so that we can all look forward to?
I mean, the lockdown is helping me write it faster. It's about the period from 1735 to the 1760s. And it is titled The Extraordinary Epoch of Nana Sahib Peshwa.
Okay, brilliant.
I'm almost more than halfway through.
Okay.
Hopefully, by the time the lockdown ends, I'll be 3/4 of the way through. And then by end of next month, the first draft should be ready. Hopefully. Let's see.
We all look forward to that. Thank you for a lovely, lovely session.
Thank you.
And I would request all the attendees, we'll be sending your feedback form to help us understand how can we make these online sessions better, and any other feedback that you would have. I'm really happy that we have kept this session in daytime. So it was in the morning and many of the people were working from home. So it was difficult, but I'm really happy that over 120 people registered and came online. This is brilliant. Thank you. And I hope to see you again. At a future date, we can do an online session.
I really miss the live audience because, you know, when you have people sitting in front of you rather than a machine which is in front of me right now, it kind of brings out much more by way of expression and emotion and story and all that. So, but great. I mean, it was first time for me and it was quite a good experience.
Thank you so much. Probably next Sankrant we can have a small lecture, I wouldn't say lecture, a workshop on Panipat, hopefully in Mumbai at the Khaki Lab. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everybody for participating.